Chapter 2. The Dress.
Yikes!
Anne Hallowell whirled around to see what had her stepmother, screeching like a mouse, had run over her toes. To her consternation, Ursula Hallowell had picked up her grey-coloured day dress from where Anne had laid it across her bed for her maid, Lucy, to pack. She gingerly held the dress up by her fingertips, as if it actually were a revolting mouse. "I like that dress. It's comfortable," Anne said as she came away from her armoire, another load of linens in her arms. "Comfortable?" Ursula exclaimed, staring at Anne in disbelief. "What has comfort to do with fashion? This rag was barely suitable for half-mourning. It is, perhaps, more in keeping for a governess or companion, but for you—" She clucked her tongue and shook her head, sending a profusion of blonde curls bouncing. "No, and no, and no!" "I like to wear that dress when I'm sketching outdoors," Anne explained, as she kneeled next to the large travelling trunk the footman had placed in the middle of her bedroom. Ursula shuddered. "A fine thing it would be for the future Countess of Galborough to be seen traipsing about Versley Park looking like a servant. And what they would say of me! I'd be called the wicked stepmother." Anne laughed. "You? Wicked? Now you are doing it too, Brown." "No, I am not. You have no notion how society tongues wag," Ursula said, her voice trembling. "Oh, Ursula," Anne said as she sat back on her heels. Ursula had suffered many an unkind comment about her marriage to Graham Hallowell, a gentleman with a daughter nearly her age. "Well, I'm certainly glad I decided to oversee your packing," Ursula said, rallying. She looked down at the dress she still held. "Praise be that your maid is below stairs ironing your dark blue gown. That I will accept. It will be suitable for wearing while sketching out of doors. But not this, nor for a future countess." Ursula Hallowell wadded up the offending grey dress and threw it into a corner of Anne's bedroom. Anne bit her lower lip against the sharp retort as she stared at the crumpled heap. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. "Ursula, nothing is settled yet," she said, infusing her voice with a calmness she far from felt. "You and the Countess of Galborough may have hatched a notion between you that Redinger and I should wed. But, ultimately, that decision will be between the Viscount and me." "It is not our notion," Ursula feebly protested. "Though we concur it is an eminently suitable match. It was, after all, the dearest wish of your grandmother and the dear departed Dowager Countess of Galborough." Anne inelegantly snorted. It was just grandmotherly musings on both sides. The late Dowager Countess of Galborough would be the first to argue against this absurd notion for her grandson, she said, ignoring her stepmother's condemning frown as she placed her linens in the bottom of the leather-bound trunk. Ursula disagreed. "We don't know that, and besides, your grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Malmsby, has not said anything against the match. She's been most amenable to it." She sat down on the edge of Anne's bed, her expression determined. Anne stood up and placed her hands on her hips. "And most likely grandmother wouldn't object, not if she remembers what I look like. I am not marriageable. It is the Galboroughs who are likely to run when they discover my disfigurement." Anne's body seemed to collapse in upon herself on hearing her words. She kneeled on the floor by the bed, grabbing Ursula's hands in hers. "Oh, Ursula, this was an insane idea. A cruel idea. How could you do this to me?" Ursula softly smiled as she shook her head. "You talk nonsense, my dear. Your scars are larger in your eyes than in any others." She gently pulled on Anne's arms to get her to stand up again. "Truthfully, that scar on your face is scarcely noticeable, and you know you only limp when you overexert yourself," Ursula reminded her. Anne laughed hollowly as she sat down on the bed next to Ursula and put her arms around her stepmother's slender shoulders. "Yours, bless your heart, are loving eyes blinded to the truth. No, do not argue," she said, as she felt Ursula stiffen. "I promised I would meet with Viscount Redinger, and so I shall. But I'll not have coercion from either side. Do you understand me?" Ursula Hallowell pouted prettily. "I'm hurt that you don't trust me. I have your best interests at heart, after all. I am your mother." Anne Hallowell laughed again, this time the sound bubbling up freely, rippling through her. She fell backward on the bed, struggling to catch her breath between giggles.
"Mother! Ursula!"
Anne gasped out, her eyes watering. She lifted her head from the peach-coloured counterpane.
"If you could only see yourself! It is so ludicrous. It always has been. You are a head shorter than I am, petite and delicate compared to my gimpy, long-legged Meg figure. And though 7 years separate us in age, I swear you have ever looked the younger and doubtlessly will ever do so." Anne struggled up onto her elbows. "Truth be told, I have been more your companion and mentor than stepdaughter these last 2 years, since father died. And I understand," she said conspiratorially. "About Colonel Brantley?" Ursula stiffened. "Honestly, Anne, I don't know what you are babbling about. What about Colonel Brantley? There is nothing to understand. We are merely good friends, for he is a delightful escort."
"Of course," Anne drawled, vastly amused by the high colour suddenly blooming on Ursula's fair cheeks. A knock at the door sobered Anne. She sat up. "Yes, what is it?" Isley, the Hallowell butler for as long as Anne could remember, opened the door.
"Pardon, madam, miss, but the Duke of Ellinbourne is below." "The Duke of Ellinbourne?"
Ursula exclaimed, rising to her feet.
"Yes, madam. Shall I tell the Duke you shall be down directly?"
Ursula ignored the butler's question. She hurried toward the dressing-table mirror to check her hair.
"Who's he?"
Anne asked.
"The name's familiar, but I cannot think why." "Honestly, my dear, you never pay attention to gossip. Just last evening Lady Jersey was speaking of him. Were you not attending?"
Ursula straightened her lace cap, tucking a wayward blonde curl back into place. "No, I attend to her as little as possible," Anne scowled. "The woman is a menace. I don't know how you can like her."
"Madam,"
Isley said.
"I don't,"
Ursula confessed, turning away from the mirror.
"But she is one of Almac's most influential patronesses, and she knows everyone and everything. One must keep abreast of society."
Anne shrugged.
"So you say. Frankly, the whole bores me,"
she said with contrived lightness. It was only in the small recesses of her mind that she admitted society scared her. In the 5 years since that Boxing Day hunt, when she'd injured herself, she'd come to accept her physical limitations. What she couldn't conquer was society's whispered comments and pitying stares. In reaction, she shunned society as best she might. Ursula waved her hand dismissively.
"Ennui is fashionable."
"Madam," Isley said again, louder. Ursula turned to look at the butler. She frowned.
"What?" "Oh, yes. Direct His Grace to the Blue Salon and tell him we shall be down directly."
"Yes, madam. Thank you, madam," Isley said with a sigh and a bow.
"We?"
Anne protested. "No, thank you." Overhearing her protest, Isley turned back toward the room.
"I beg your pardon, miss, but His Grace did ask to see both of you. He said something about a message from the Viscount Redinger."
He bowed again, apologetically, and left to descend the stairs. Anne rose from the bed.
"Oh, fie! Worse and worse!"
she exclaimed, theatrically clinging to a bedpost.
"Redinger is already reneging."
She grinned and leaned back against the post.
"Just as well. Perhaps now I shall be able to enjoy my visit with grandmother, study her art collection at leisure, and do some outdoor sketching." "Ellinbourne and Redinger," murmured Ursula. "I had no notion they were acquainted."
She stared pensively at the bedroom door to the hall, as if she could see through it and down to their visitor below.
"If I'd known, I would have been sure to have his name included on the house-party list. Bother. The numbers will be uneven if we include another male at this date."
She turned back to look at Anne.
"Can you think of another single female, preferably elderly, whom we could hurriedly invite?" "Poor Brantley!"
Anne said.
"You think—"
Ursula began, astonishment clear on her face.
"Perhaps you could uninvite Colonel Brantley," Anne suggested. "It might be kinder than allowing him to suffer while you cast your lures for the Duke."
Ursula laughed and shook her head.
"You are far off the mark, but since you do not know of Ellinbourne, I suppose that is to be expected. Come, straighten your fichu, and let's meet our guest. It is not socially politic to leave a duke kicking his heels."
"Oh, I don't know. That sounds like an apropos occupation for most." Ursula clucked her tongue and pushed Anne's slow-moving hands out of the way so she could arrange the ivory lace fichu at the top of Anne's fawn-coloured gown. She wrinkled her nose as she noted what dress Anne wore, but inwardly shrugged. At least it was not that horrid grey thing.
"Not your mother, eh?"
Ursula teased as she stepped away and looked at Anne. She was not beautiful, not in the classical sense, but there was such elegance in her, especially when she smiled, and Anne really had no notion of it. Such a travesty. Ursula tucked Anne's arm in hers and led her toward the door.